Egyptologists have historically denied the notion of a Black African Egypt. For decades, anyone who suggested the origins of ancient Egyptian culture begin with Black Africans were labeled as Afrocentric, as a way to discredit their work and silence their voice. Even European scholars who dared to present evidence of a Black African Egypt were accused of Afrocentrism. Thanks to the dedicated research of great minds such as Sheikh Anta Diop, Gerald Massey, John Henry Clark, Robert Bouval, and a host of others, their work is finally being vindicated by modern academia and embraced by people from all walks of life.
At the beginning, before the world started spinning, God painted a masterpiece. He completed a portrait of a fortress without any ink. His manifestation was our creation. That's how the mind works with no limitation. Great thoughts of the divine's minds is minds, because great minds think alike. And within that portrait, he left a copy of himself. I am he, if no one else. Before there was books on the shelf, Proverbs was words to describe the native land, origin of man, point of origin. Directions navigated by the star's reflection, extend the galaxy's orbit. In tune with Luna's moon, a monsoon of imagery. Ink is the enemy. So when I bleed, it's a masterpiece. My blood brings peace to a revolution of thought. Concentration is a form of manifestation. That's how man feeds the nation. Food for thought. Substance is lost when we put value to paper. The physical is an individual, but the mind is one. And the minute you realize that manifestation is everything, the mind has won.
Amenhotep III was the great-grandson of Thutmose III and grandfather of the famous boy king Tutankhamun. He reigned for almost 40 years at a time when Egypt and Kemet was at the peak of their glory. He lived a life of productivity, building huge temples and statues, with stable international trade and plentiful supply of gold, incense, and exotic animal hides. The economy of Kemet prospered greatly. This extraordinary wealth led to an outpouring of artistic talent, and Amenhotep was the driving force behind this inspiration. His building works could be found all over the lands of Kemet, also known as Tameri, the beloved land, and Nubia, indigenously known as Kush or Taseti, the land of the bow. One of Amenhotep's great serving achievements is the Temple of Waset, known by the Greeks as Thebes and modern Egyptians as Luxor. He was incredibly rich, and his palace at the great capital city of Waset was the most opulent in all the ancient world. Another one of Amenhotep's great achievements was the Temple of Celeb, built in 1378 BC in what is Nubia. Celeb was a monument dedicated to Amun, the god of gods, whose primordial birthplace was the holy mountain of Jebel Barkal, located in modern-day Sudan. This temple was not only a monument built to honor Amun, but also to honor the fusion of the two cultures of Kush and Kemet. It was initially dedicated to Amun, but after Akhenaten assumed power, it was rededicated to Aten. During the 18th dynasty, Celeb is considered to be one of the major expressions of the Kemetic presence within the Kingdom of Kush. Amenhotep's reign would be etched in stone as a peaceful one, at a time when the nation of Kemet was governed by native rulership.
Traditional Egyptologists have relegated the black presence in Egypt to the 25th dynasty, which they refer to as the Kushite period. It's a period of time in the 8th century BC when indigenous Africans from Kush came into Kemet, which had fallen on hard times. It was invaded by Libyans and Assyrians and others. They came into Kemet to restore the land of their ancestors. Those were their specific words. And for approximately 100 years, 5 African rulers, Kushite rulers, came into Kemet, drove out the foreigners, and then rebuilt Kemetic culture and civilization.
The earliest roots of early Nile Valley culture can be traced outside of the Nile Valley. The first continuous agricultural tradition in Africa was developed by early Sudanese Saharan populations. These agricultural developments took place over 10,000 years ago, west of Nubia, in regions which have since been swallowed by the Sahara. Evidence of early pharaonic culture was discovered at the archaeological site of Kosto in modern-day Sudan. The Kosto incense burner depicts one of the earliest images of the white crown of Upper Kemet and was found in the tomb of a Nubian ruler at the site of Kosto. Besides the crown, it also depicts a procession of sacred boats, a falcon deity, cow iconography, and the palace facade called a serik. It appears to present a ritual that involves a royal procession by boat to a palace. The Kosto burner and hundreds of other artifacts were found near a cemetery of large tombs, which contained symbols of wealth and representations of the rulers and their victories. The remains of the population inhabiting the region were what Egyptologists called the A group, or Black Africans. Other representations and monuments were then identified, and in the process, a lost kingdom called Thyself was discovered. The site of Kosto is evidence of the earliest practice of pharaonic kingship in the Nile Valley, which suggests this was the seat of Kemet's founding dynasty. The civilization of Kemet was not homogeneous. The delta was a transcontinental highway connecting 3 continents. Kemet was a multicultural society with many different populations of indigenous Africans, transporting their cultures and traditions into the Nile Valley, as well as populations of non-Africans migrating back to Africa and settling in the delta regions and along the coastlines of North Africa.
The Mediterranean coast of Egypt, where the mighty River Nile ends its long journey through Africa and mixes with the waters behind me. When you come here to Alexandria, it's easy to see why Egypt became such a melting pot. You can get here through the Nile Valley and also across the Mediterranean Sea from Europe and the Levant, what we call the Middle East today. This facilitated trade, but it also led to an exchange of ideas and cultures. Egypt's strategic position clearly made it attractive and hence vulnerable to attack throughout the centuries. The evidence of outsiders coming to Egypt from Europe, Asia and Arabia and mixing with the locals is apparent in the physical appearance of some of the population today. But when you reach further back into time to the monuments of the ancient Egyptian civilization, 1,000 kilometers from the Mediterranean Sea, you're reminded of ancient Egypt's status as that of a great African civilization.
The Nabta Playa stone circle is the world's oldest astronomical site located in modern-day Sudan. Nabta Playa emerged in the Nubian desert as a regional ceremonial center during the Middle Neolithic period. Archaeological studies have identified hundreds of the hearths, cultural debris, and numerous mummified cattle, which represented wealth and power amongst the people of the time.
The cattle iconography was very important to them, as well as in ancient Egypt, which came later.
And one of the important correlations is which you as an astrophysicist studying archaeoastronomy pay attention to, is similar alignments found in the Giza Plateau where the Great Pyramids are.
So in ancient Egypt, the heliacal rising of Sirius heralded the timing of the floods. Mm-hmm. The Nile flooded every year at about the same time, just after the heliacal rising of Sirius.
Ancient Africans studied the precession of the equinox from as early as 9000 BC to around 3400 BC at the site of the Nabta Playa. This is where geometry and the concept of pi was developed, as well as the world's earliest evidence of pastoral life. Archaeological evidence reveals these populations were Black Africans who were indigenous to the entire continent of Africa, not just below the Sahara.
At about 3500 BC, the monsoon rains pattern moved further south. So Nabta Playa region became extreme desert and had to be abandoned. And that's when the culture, the ancient Egyptian dynastic culture that shows many of the same elements, pops up in the Nile Valley.
So you're suggesting maybe these people migrated north?
Yes.
Extreme weather conditions forced both populations of the Green Sahara and the Nabta Playa to migrate to the Nile Valley, and with them, they brought the traditions of cattle worship, mummification, geometry, and the study of the stars. When the Nabta Playa region dried up due to the rapid climate change, these populations migrated following the flow of the Nile River, bringing with them their knowledge and high science.
Yes, so there's this very clear link from the astronomy at Nabta Playa at around the time 4000 BC. We know from the anthropological evidence that the people just predating the dynastic civilization in the Nabta Playa region were Black African people. There were monuments, temples in Old Kingdom Egypt that were rebuilt to track the rising of Sirius as it moved. With their alignment of the temples was rebuilt to track the rising of Sirius as it moved through precession motion. And we found the same thing at Nabta Playa. These megalithic stone alignments, they tracked the rising of Sirius and other stars as they moved through precession.
These Africans from the south would move into what would later become Upper Kemet and establish the early pharaonic dynasties.
I like to follow the evidence, and to me, I didn't care about which race of humans it was at the time.
But you did point out that Egyptian guidebooks that were popular had some very racist descriptions about the attitude of Egyptians toward different racial groups.
Yes, you'll see even in current guidebooks probably a kind of a hierarchical description of the views of the races, yes.
So many Egyptians today who probably think of themselves primarily as Mediterranean people, even though they're on the African continent, look down at the idea that their very powerful ancient culture might have emerged out of Black Africa.
Yeah, and it's clearly, obviously, a modern ethnic view or ethnic mindset that leads to that kind of thinking. Not any evidence from ancient history, I don't think.
When Narmer came from the south, he conquered the Delta region, uniting Lower and Upper Kemet. Upper Kemet would serve as the political, spiritual, and power center of the nation. Lower Kemet in these times were inhospitable, and the Delta was but a wet marshland. But in the seasonally dry channels of the Second Cataract, early African farmers learned to manage parts of the river's annual flood. This knowledge would be transferred into Kemet's wide floodplain, giving rise to the early Nabta civilization in Upper Kemet. They used the thousands of years of accumulated knowledge to accurately predict the flood season and transfer the wet marshlands of the Delta into the world's most fertile farmland. They would also use this knowledge to build the Great Pyramids. Their mastery of sacred geometry allowed them to align the Great Pyramids nearly perfectly along the cardinal points, north, east, south, and west, within 1/15 of a degree of true north. Although each was their own nation with its own identity, Temeri, Ta-Netcher, and Taseti were connected culturally, commercially, and spiritually. The cultural exchange between these three Nile Valley civilizations was fluid. The emergence of Kemet was an evolution of African science, philosophy, and agriculture, which seeded the very foundations of civilization.
So the Greeks traveled to Egypt and said that the Egyptians were the faultless people. They said that they were the greatest people on earth, the most beautiful people on earth. They went to Egypt, the Greek mathematicians went to Egypt to study mathematics. Pythagoras spent 23 years studying math in Egypt. The Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, was used in Kemet to build the pyramid at least 2,000 years before Pythagoras was born. Hippocrates, the Greek father of medicine, acknowledges Amenhotep as the father of medicine. Amenhotep was the designer of the step pyramid at Saqqara. The columns that are referred to as Greek columns, you can find them at Saqqara. So the elements of Greek design, Roman design, Greek philosophy, all had their beginnings in ancient Kemet or Egypt. Around 1919, Breasted wrote an incredible book that documented his travels in Egypt and described the ancient Egyptians as dark-skinned people with woolly hair who were not unlike the Nubians who live in Egypt now. Well, this book was called Ancient Times, and it was a favorite book of John D. Rockefeller. He read it to his children all the time. And then Rockefeller decided to fund Breasted, gave him $1.5 million to establish the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago. But he also had caveats with that contribution, in that in the second edition of Ancient Times, which was published around 1935, Breasted removed all references to the ancient Egyptians as being dark-skinned people, and he added a new chapter where he said that they were members of the Great White Race. Most of what we know about Egypt is viewed through Greek and Roman eyes. Egypt is a Greek word, Sphinx is a Greek word, pyramid is a Greek word. So until we can begin to interpret this indigenous African culture and civilization through an African lens, then we will always view them from a disadvantage. But there's George Reisner, who excavated in Sudan, and so many others who saw the historical truth, saw that black people who have been marginalized in this country and around the world, who have been enslaved because Pope Eugenius IV said that black people had no souls. So people did not look upon us as people who created anything of value. So I can understand how racists would say, oh no, well, these buildings could not have been built by black people. They don't have intelligence. These black people could not have written these great scripts. So they were operating under a false system of white superiority. So when they were confronted with the historical reality, they suffered what's referred to in psychology as an identity quake, cognitive dissonance. You know, they couldn't connect the dots, so they fabricated historical lies. And so the work that we're currently engaged in right now is to tell the truth. We are literally digging up the truth, and the truth speaks for itself.
Reisner's writings about the Kushites are a window into his warped racial beliefs.
Its very race appears to be a product of its poverty and its isolation. a Negroid Egyptian mixture fused together on a desert riverbank, too far away and too poor to attract a stronger and better race.
Even as he was awed by the pyramids he excavated, he refused to believe they could have been built by the ancestors of the black Africans he saw all around him. His prejudices even seem to have clouded his eyesight. In 1916, when he discovered beautiful black granite statues of the great Kushite kings, he argued they were not real likenesses. Instead, he proposed that the kings and the builders of all the Kushite monuments had actually been light-skinned foreigners.
The discipline of Egyptology has its origins with the invasion of Egypt by Napoleon Bonaparte in the late 18th century. Napoleon's army would defeat the Ottoman Empire at a time when European colonism was nearing its zenith. The Ottoman Empire, also known as the Turkish Empire, rose to prominence in the 12th century with the help of the Mamluks. The Mamluks, which translates to one who is owned, were an Eastern European population of slave soldiers who overthrew their rulers and came into power. In 1798, Napoleon led the French army into Egypt, swiftly conquering Alexandria and Cairo. The Battle of the Pyramids marked the beginning of the end, 7 centuries of Ottoman and Mamluk rule in Egypt. When Napoleon invaded Egypt, he brought along an army of scholars whose studies during French occupation became the foundation of Egyptology. This field of study was employed to promote the idea of European imperialism. Jean-Léon Gérome's painting, Bonaparte Before the Sphinx, captures Napoleon's instinct that the glory of ancient Egypt could be harnessed to exalt French colonial power. The 5,600-year-old Tawy mummy, known as the Black Mummy of the Green Sahara, is the earliest evidence of advanced mummification in the world and was discovered in 1958 by Professor Fabrizio Mori. It predates the earliest Kemetic mummy by nearly 1,000 years and was found in modern-day Libya. This 2.5-year-old boy's organs were removed, as evidenced by incisions in his stomach and thorax, and an organic preservative was inserted to stop his body from decomposing. He was embalmed and wrapped in cowhide. An ostrich eggshell necklace was placed around his neck, and the boy was given a royal burial.
Because of this very sophisticated form of evisceration, what we have is essentially the earliest form of complete mummification yet found in Africa. And it's interesting that everybody always goes to Egypt as the home of mummification, and yet in fact from the dates of the Black Mummy, there's certainly nothing like that going on in Egypt at that time.
Anthropological evidence has revealed the populations of the Green Sahara during the early to mid-Holocene era were black Africans. Due to the extreme climate change and the desertification of the Sahara, these populations were forced to migrate, and with them they transported the science of mummification and the tradition of cattle worship to the Nile Valley. These traditions had deep African roots and would continue in the Nile Valley.
We found the bones and charcoal of cattle, so this was really the very first hard evidence, archaeological evidence of some kind of ritual connected to the cattle cult.
I find it very interesting that these animal-headed human figures exist outside of Egypt at such an incredibly early date, and then later in pharaonic culture you find exactly the same motifs repeated in the very sophisticated Egyptian art form.
The Nile Valley was populated by various tribes and populations from the source of the Nile, the Green Sahara, Nabta, Playa, and the Horn of Africa. Early pharaonic culture was seated in the south between the regions of Kusto and the city of Nekheb. It was this fusion of early African ingenuity which planted the seed of civilization and birthed the nation of Kemet.
We have just here Tripoli, we have here Cairo and the Nile, and just in the center we have the Caucasus Mountains, and we have Algeria, Libya, Egypt, and Sudan, and Chad, and Niger, and Mali. So this area is bigger than Europe, so it means that all this very, very large extent was inhabited during ancient times by the same ancient African Saharan culture.
I find it quite extraordinary that this Central Saharan civilization shows all the features we generally associate with later Egyptian pharaonic culture, and mummification is a prime example. There are definite links between the two cultures.
Check out our apparel line and become part of the Know Thyself family. We have fresh t-shirts, hoodies, and caps to stay fly and represent the culture. All proceeds go towards the funding of future episodes. Log in with us. www.knowthyselfinstitute.com. Support the channel by tapping that like, subscribe, and notify button to be alerted to new content.
Queen Tiye was a Kemetic queen of Nubian origin. She lived between 1398 and 1338 BC and was the daughter of Yuya and Tajuya. Her family was well respected within Kemet, and she married Amenhotep III, a noble Kemetic king. She was the stepmother of Nefertiti, mother of Akhenaten, and grandmother of Tutankhamun. Queen Tiye governed the 18th dynasty beside her husband as a wise advisor and powerful ruler. She was not only one of Africa's greatest queens, but also one of history's most powerful women. This can be attributed to her significant influence in Kemet during her husband and son's reign. She ruled by the side of her husband and was referred to as the Great Royal Wife. Queen Tiye was a prominent figure in the public arena and wielded great power in administering state affairs. She was responsible for communicating with foreign rulers, and the Amarna letters are a testament to the respect and admiration bestowed upon her by foreign leaders. Amenhotep III genuinely loved and honored his wife and regarded her as his equal. He devoted a number of shrines in her honor and constructed a temple dedicated to her in Nubia in the city of Sardinia. There, she was worshipped as a living form of the goddess Hathor. As the American Egyptologist David O'Connor and Eric Klein note, the unprecedented thing about Tiye is not where she came from, but what she became. No previous queen ever figured so prominently in her husband's lifetime. When her son Amenhotep IV ascended to the throne, Queen Tiye was given the title of King's Mother. Her son later changed his name to Akhenaten, causing contention within Kemet with his controversial religious reforms. Despite his deviation from traditional practices, Queen Tiye always supported her son, a demonstration to her steadfastness and devotion. The mighty Queen Tiye ruled with the same authority as a man and exercised her power in equal measure with the great kings of the ancient world. Her death marked the end of the 18th dynasty's remarkable reign, and her legacy established her as one of Africa's greatest women rulers. Africa's role in world history must be put into proper context, and the contributions Africans made to human progress and evolution must become basic curriculum. History must be rewritten, and the historical records must be corrected.
The word pyramid is a Greek word, but the original name, the African name for this structure is Mir. And the word Mir means the place of ascension. Now, the Mir or pyramids were never tombs. There were no bodies ever buried in any of them. The bodies were always buried underneath them. So if we follow this logic, if Mir is a structure that means the place of ascension, then these structures were built over tombs primarily to facilitate the ascension of the souls buried beneath them into heaven where they will be reborn. So this grew out of the ancient African concept of spirituality. The ancient Africans in Kemet were the first human beings who wrote about the soul, who wrote about the salvation of the soul, and specifically talked about where the soul of human beings go after they die to be reborn. All of that is documented in a text that is known mistakenly as the pyramid text, found in the pyramid, in the tomb underneath the pyramid of Unas, who was the last king of the 5th dynasty. We have a copy of the pyramid text in the tomb that we're currently excavating, the 25th dynasty tomb that we're currently excavating. So we're able to document beyond a shadow of a doubt that Africans were the first people to have a concept of the soul, the immortality of the soul. And then in our 25th dynasty tomb, 2,000 years later, we have a record of Africans having retained that knowledge and recording it on the walls of the tomb of a priest named Karak Amen. There's a profound difference between Kemet and Egypt. Egypt is a Greek word that was used to describe one temple in Kemet. And so Kemet was ruled by indigenous African people by almost 3,000 years. Egypt was ruled by Greeks for approximately 600 years. So if you look at that image on the screen, you can see 9 African rulers of Kemet and 3 European rulers of Egypt. So Egypt is white, but Kemet is African.
I am here today to make a plea for history, to say that history is not something about the past. No, history from the African point of view is something which allows you to have self-respect. It helps you to have a reclaimed identity. It helps you to assert yourself on the social, political and cultural agenda today. So it's a very, very important thing, and in my view, it's been overlooked wrongly. It's very fashionable to talk about education. Education is important. It's the most empowering thing you can give a young child in Africa, and it's true. But what kind of education? Quality education is the thing that's very important, and history is an integral part of that. And not just for people living in Africa, but also the established African diaspora, be it in the Caribbean, be it in Brazil, be it in the United States, whether it's also the more recently arrived diaspora Africans living in the West, all part and parcel of the same history. It's a shared history. It doesn't matter where you live in the world. You are of African descent. Be you, in Brazil, where, by the way, a lot of people don't realize that around 100 million Brazilians, that's about more than 50% of the population, either have African heritage or mixed African heritage. They are the second largest African population after Nigeria, or the African American diaspora, the most powerful and influential diaspora of Africans in the world. Our history is about identity. It's about self-respect. It's about claiming our own narrative. So it's that oneness of the disparate community. It's bringing everybody together under, one banner. Only when lions have historians will the hunters cease to be heroes.
Morning to you, man. Morning to your love. I say, Africa must wake up, the sleeping sons of Jacob, for what tomorrow may bring. May a better day come. Yesterday we were kings. Can you tell me, young ones, who are we today? Yeah, now. Well, Africa must wake up, the sleeping sons of Jacob, for what tomorrow may bring. May a better day come. Yesterday we were kings. Can you tell me, young ones, who are we today?
The black oasis, ancient Africa, the sacred, awaken the sleeping giant. Science, art is your creation. I dreamt that we could visit old Kemet. Your history is too complex and rigid for some Western critics. They want the whole subject diminished, but Africa's the origin of all the world's religions. We praise bridges that carried us over the battlefronts of Sudanic soldiers, the task put before us.
You hear me out? Africa must wake up, the sleeping sons of Jacob, for what tomorrow may bring. May a better day come. Yesterday we were kings. Can you tell me, young ones, who are we today? Yeah, now. Well, Africa must wake up, the sleeping sons of Jacob, for what tomorrow may bring. May a better day come. Yesterday we were kings. Can you tell me, young ones, who are we today?
Who are we today? The slums, diseases, AIDS, we need that all to fade. We cannot be afraid. So who are we today? We are the morning after, the makeshift youth, the slave ship captured. Our diaspora is the final chapter. The ancestral lineage built pyramids, America's first immigrant, the king's son and daughters from now waters. The first architect, the first philosophers, astronomers, the first prophets and the doctors was us.
Hey, now can we all pray, each in his own way, teaching and learning. We can work it out. We'll have a warm bed, we'll have some warm bread and shelter from the storm dread, and we can work it out. Mother Nature feeds all in famine and drought. Tell those selfish in ways not to share us out. What's a tree without root? Lion without tooth, the lie without truth. You hear me out? Africa must wake up, the sleeping sons of Jacob, for what tomorrow may bring. May a better day come. Yesterday we were kings. Can you tell me, young ones, who are we today? Yeah, Lord. Well, Africa must wake up, the sleeping sons of Jacob, for what tomorrow may bring. May some more love come. Yesterday we were kings. I tell you, young blood, this world is yours today.
Daddy, why Nabta Tiye, Oninki Dorte Dita, Wadinka Tiye, Otal Markila Deso, Wadinka Dunshe, Otad Ninki Tamai, Wadinka Dohe. Daddy, why Nabta Tiye, Oninki Dorte Dita, Wadinka Tiye, Otal Markila Deso, Wadinka Dunshe, Otad Ninki Tamai, Wadinka Dohe.
Everybody out there, this is Nas, Damian Marley, distant relatives. We're all distant relatives, no matter where you from, where you live, how near, how far. Africa, China, Japan, Afghanistan, Israel. We're all fam, we're all distant relatives. So that's why we came together. One of the reasons myself and Damien came together. Cause we all come from one place, and that's Africa. That's right, you too, and you, the whole world. We all family. We just spread out all over the place. So to all my distant relatives, let's take it back home.
I say, well, Africa must wake up, the sleeping sons of Jacob, for what tomorrow may bring. May a better day come. Yesterday we were kings. Can you tell me, young ones, who are we today? Yeah, now. Well, Africa must wake up, the sleeping sons of Jacob, for what tomorrow may bring. May a better day come. Yesterday we were kings. Can you tell me, young ones, who are